take a look at the back of your hand. The color you see is not decoration, and it is not a meaningless accident. It is the visible result of an ancient biological bargain between your ancestors and sunlight. For thousands of generations, the human body kept adjusting one crucial setting: how much ultraviolet radiation should enter the skin, and how much should be blocked. Too much sunlight could damage cells and destroy vital nutrients. Too little could prevent the body from making enough vitamin D. Human skin color emerged from that tension. The story begins in Africa, where our species evolved under intense ultraviolet radiation. Early Homo sapiens almost certainly had heavily pigmented skin. Beneath the powerful equatorial sun, that pigmentation offered protection that was essential for survival and reproduction. Long before modern clothing, sunscreen, enclosed buildings, or medical care, the skin itself had to serve as the first defensive barrier. Skin is not simply a covering stretched over the body. It is a living organ that regulates temperature, senses pressure and pain, prevents water loss, helps resist infection, and shields deeper tissues from environmental damage. One of its most important defenses is melanin, the pigment produced by specialized cells called melanocytes. Melanin absorbs and disperses ultraviolet radiation before much of it can penetrate farther into the body. In practical terms, it functions like a built-in sun filter. More melanin generally produces darker skin and stronger protection against ultraviolet exposure. Less melanin allows more ultraviolet energy to pass through. That protection matters because ultraviolet radiation can damage DNA. Repeated damage can produce mutations, premature skin aging, and cancers. However, the evolutionary story is not only about cancer. Many skin cancers appear after the peak reproductive years, so they may not fully explain why dark pigmentation became so strongly favored. Another factor may have been even more important: folate. Folate, a form of vitamin B9, supports cell division, DNA production, fertility, and the early development of embryos. During the first weeks of pregnancy, adequate folate is necessary for the neural tube, which later becomes the brain and spinal cord, to close correctly. Severe deficiency can increase the risk of devastating birth defects and pregnancy loss. Ultraviolet radiation can break down folate circulating near the skin. In regions where sunlight is intense throughout the year, people with insufficient pigmentation would have faced greater folate depletion. That could reduce reproductive success and threaten healthy fetal development. Darker skin therefore offered a powerful advantage. It protected vulnerable tissue while helping preserve a nutrient closely tied to successful reproduction. Under equatorial conditions, high melanin levels made biological sense. They reduced ultraviolet damage and helped guard the body's folate supply. Natural selection does not care about beauty standards, social status, or cultural preference. It simply favors traits that improve the chances of surviving and producing healthy offspring in a particular environment. Pigmentation was never perfectly fixed within a population either. People inherited different combinations of variants, and many could temporarily produce more melanin after sun exposure through tanning. Evolution worked on that existing variation, slowly changing which combinations became common under particular conditions. Then humans began moving. Over many thousands of years, small groups traveled out of Africa, expanding through the Middle East, Europe, Asia, and eventually much of the world. This was not one organized migration. Families moved, populations separated, climates shifted, and descendants continued farther than their ancestors. As some groups entered higher latitudes, the sunlight around them changed dramatically. Near the equator, sunlight strikes Earth more directly. Farther north or south, it arrives at a lower angle, passes through more atmosphere, and delivers less ultraviolet B radiation. Winters become longer, cloud cover increases, people spend months under weaker sunlight. The protective pigmentation that had worked brilliantly in Africa now created a new difficulty. The body needs ultraviolet B radiation to manufacture vitamin D in the skin. When sunlight reaches a cholesterol-related compound there, it begins a chemical process that produces vitamin D. This vitamin helps the intestine absorb calcium and phosphorus, supports bones and muscles, and contributes to immune function. Without enough vitamin D, children can develop rickets, leaving their bones soft, weak, and deformed. Adults may develop osteomalacia, another condition involving poorly mineralized bones. In women, serious skeletal changes could make pregnancy and childbirth more dangerous. In communities with no supplements, fortified foods, or reliable medical treatment, chronic deficiency could reduce both survival and reproductive success. Now imagine a highly pigmented population living for generations beneath weak northern sunlight. Their melanin still blocks ultraviolet radiation effectively, but the local environment provides far less radiation to begin with. The body may struggle to make enough vitamin D, especially when clothing, shelter, winter weather, or limited food sources reduce exposure further. In that environment, genetic variants associated with lower melanin production could become advantageous. Individuals with somewhat lighter skin might produce vitamin D more efficiently under weak sunlight. If that improved bone health, fertility, childbirth outcomes, or childhood survival, those variants could become more common over time. This change did not happen because lighter skin was universally superior. It happened because the environmental calculation had changed. In regions with intense ultraviolet radiation, more pigmentation remained protective. In regions with weak ultraviolet radiation, reduced pigmentation could improve vitamin D production. Evolution was not creating a hierarchy. It was adjusting populations to different levels of sunlight. The process was also more complicated than a smooth northward fading of skin color. Ancient DNA suggests that some European hunter-gatherers retained darker pigmentation for thousands of years after humans entered Europe. One famous example is Cheddar Man, who lived in Britain about 10,000 years ago and was reconstructed from genetic evidence as likely having dark or dark to intermediate skin, blue eyes, and dark hair. That combination seems unusual today, only because modern populations have trained us to associate certain traits with one another. In prehistory, those combinations were different. Many of the variants linked to very light skin in present-day Europeans rose to high frequency relatively recently. Agriculture may have accelerated the shift. Hunter-gatherers often consumed varied diets that could include fish, wild animals, eggs, and organ meats, all potential sources of vitamin D. Early farming communities became increasingly dependent on grains and other crops. Their diets provided calories, but often less vitamin D. Once dietary vitamin D declined, sunlight became even more important. In low ultraviolet regions, people whose skin emitted more ultraviolet B radiation could have gained a stronger advantage. Farming also created larger, denser, more connected populations, allowing useful genetic variants to spread across communities more rapidly than they might have in small, scattered bands. Skin color, however, is not controlled by one simple switch. It is a polygenic trait shaped by many genes. These genes influence the quantity and type of melanin, the size and distribution of pigment packages inside cells, and the way skin responds to sunlight. Even more striking, lighter pigmentation evolved through different genetic routes in different populations. Europeans and East Asians both developed, on average, lighter skin than equatorial African populations, yet many of the relevant genetic variants are not the same. Natural selection reached broadly similar outcomes using different biological pathways. This is convergent evolution. Separate populations arriving at comparable adaptations because they faced comparable environmental pressures. Eye color followed its own history. Blue eyes are associated with genetic changes that reduce melanin in the iris, particularly changes affecting regulation near the OCA2 and HERS2 genes. Evidence suggests that a major blue eye variant arose thousands of years ago and spread through certain populations. It may trace back to a common ancestral mutation, although describing it as one identifiable person is more dramatic than the evidence allows. These details reveal how recently many supposedly timeless human features appeared. Traits that people treat as fixed racial markers are often young, overlapping, and controlled by complex combinations of ancestry and environment. Human variation does not divide neatly into biological boxes. At its core, skin pigmentation is an ultraviolet management system. It reflects a balance between protecting folate and tissue from excessive radiation while allowing enough ultraviolet B to support vitamin D production. Latitude mattered, diet mattered, migration mattered, clothing, shelter, climate, and population history mattered too. No skin color is biologically superior in every environment. Light skin can be vulnerable under intense sun. Dark skin can make vitamin D production more difficult where ultraviolet levels are low. Modern life changes these pressures through sunscreen, supplements, fortified food, indoor living, medicine, and global migration, but the ancient biological trade-off remains visible. Human beings later built prejudice, slavery, segregation, and political hierarchies around differences that began as local adaptations to sunlight. That is the deepest irony. Societies assigned moral value to pigmentation, while biology assigned it only environmental function. Every shade of human skin belongs to the same species and traces back to shared African ancestry. The differences emerged as populations traveled through changing climates and solved the same survival problem in different ways. Your skin is not a badge of separate human origin. It is a record of migration, nutrition, sunlight, and time. Every complexion is one version of the same ancient answer. Block enough sunlight to protect life, but emit enough to sustain it.